Okay, it's officially 1 o'clock. So Angus, looks like you're here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So Angus Keir is from Avaanz, and why don't I just hand it right over to you?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Let me bring up my presentation here. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Angus Keir. I've been using Quantrix for 11 years now. We've been using it for socioeconomic consulting. I started off with an engineering firm, and we were using it a lot for waste modeling flows. Recently, during COVID, 3 years ago, formed a new company, Avaanz, which is a socioeconomic and environmental consulting firm. We've grown to 25 employees. We include economists such as myself, engagement specialists, social scientists, and various environmental consultants, including planners. What we do is we collaborate with clients to advance project objectives and community well-being. So informed decision-making is the cornerstone of what we offer, so people can understand the impacts of projects and understand what it costs to implement projects. Clear communication of benefits and challenges arising from projects allow for effective decision-making. The market sectors that we operate in are government, energy, mining, and waste. And our practice areas are economics, environmental regulatory approvals. So we'll deal with environmental assessments where a project is looking to move forward and get approved. We'll deal with social projects, and I'm going to speak to one of those here today. And we also deal with ESG. We also modeled greenhouse gas emissions. So project applications that we've used for Quantrix is financial modeling, looking at the cost of implementing a program, looking at, so what I'll talk about here today is looking at the cost for school food programming, the cost for long-term care programming, the cost for language maintenance in terms of traditional language maintenance. We've done a lot of economic modeling with Quantrix as well, looking at large-scale projects such as power plants, large transportation projects where they're looking to develop a new road, and determining what are the economic effects of this project. Specifically, a lot of clients want to know, okay, how many jobs will be created by this project? Or how will this influence jobs if we do not go forward with this project? And knowing the number of jobs and the economic impacts of these large-scale projects helps provide reason to go forward and justify, okay, well, this is going to really benefit a lot of people. And so, clients like to be able to express that to who they're showing the data to. Another reason we use Quantrix is for systems modeling. As I said, 11 years ago, I started with Quantrix, and the use application for that was to model waste flows. Since that day, even just yesterday, handed in a report modeling waste flows. So we've done projects for the government of Nova Scotia looking at waste flows. We've done projects for out in British Columbia for the city of Vancouver, various municipalities understanding municipal solid waste. So the garbage that you put out there and the recycling, how does that flow through the system? How can you expect to improve diversion? What options are there for improving diversion and these types of things? Avaanz has done a lot of work with ITK. ITK stands for Inuit Nunangat, and this is the national representational body for Inuit in Canada. What I have here on the left-hand side is a map of the traditional areas for Inuit. So Inuit Nunangat is comprised of 4 regions. On the left-hand side, you'll see just beside Alaska there and above the Northwest Territories and Yukon is Inuvialuit Settlement Region. In the center is Nunavut, which is its own territory. Then we have above Quebec, Nunavik, and on the far right-hand side, Nunatsiavut. All these 4 regions comprise 35% of Canada's total landmass, so it's a huge area, and it's comprised of 51 communities. However, the number of people dispersed throughout these communities is relatively small compared to the population of Canada, which just reached over 4 million. So there's about 50,000 Inuit that live within the highlighted area here in the 4 regions in Inuit Nunangat. One of the huge issues in Inuit Nunangat is food insecurity. So I provided some stats here. 76% of Inuit aged 15 plus are food insecure. And then an older study showed that 70% of Inuit households with small children have severe or moderate food insecurity. So there was a project that we completed recently where we were looking at the cost of what would be the cost of delivering a school food program in Inuit Nunangat. And of course, Quantrix came into play. So with Quantrix, what's great about attacking these projects is that we're able to organize all the elements that we need to look at. And the cost of school food program, we had to look at school enrollment and attendance, the cost of food, the cost of labor, training expenditures, other operations and maintenance, and infrastructure. So in our models, and when we're thinking about projects, we have to consider, okay, for this project, what are the various factors we need to look at? And I think for these consulting projects, you have to be very creative too in determining where you're going to get the data. As you can imagine, for such a remote region, the data is not readily available. Oftentimes, we'll have to use our engagement specialists to help assisting with collecting data through interviews and workshops. So for the cost of school food program, I'd like to go through each of the factors that we used to come to our conclusion in terms of understanding the cost of delivering this program. So first of all, we looked at each of the schools in each of the communities, and we obtained their enrollment data, their historical enrollment data. Using that data, we then developed projections to understand, okay, there's this many students presently, but how many can we expect in the future? And then, given the issue of food insecurity, and if we have this program, well, how is that going to affect attendance rates? Based on what's going on in Alaska, using Alaska as a proxy, we discovered attendance improves drastically when you have a school food program. And you can imagine that it would especially improve in a region that's so insecure as Inuit Nunangat. Next, we looked at the cost of food. Now, the cost of food was obtained in 2 ways. First, we spoke with community food centers within Inuit Nunangat, 2 specifically, one in Iqaluit and another one in a smaller community. Iqaluit, by the way, is the largest community in Inuit Nunangat, and the largest community is just over 7,000 people. So most of these communities are less than 1,000, a couple hundred. So we looked at we asked them, what is the cost of preparing, what's the cost of the food itself? And we got some information on that. And we also then looked at the Revised Northern Food Basket. The Revised Northern Food Basket is some data that's available online, and they look at the differentiation between cost for a consistent basket of food and how much it costs for each of the different communities. And as you can imagine, given that how remote Inuit Nunangat is and the vast area that it covers, the cost of a meal in one region is considerably different than in another region. And this is all based on, transportation being able to access that community. So looking at the cost of food, we got this data from the food centers and the Revised Northern Foods Basket. Then we looked at, okay, well, if we're going to have this enrollment projection, and we're going to have this attendance rate, this improved attendance rate, well, how many meals are we serving a day? How many instructional days are there per year? And we can determine, okay, this is what it's going to cost for food itself. The next aspect we looked at is the cost of labor. Again, this data is not really readily available. What is the wages are? We could find the wages looking on the web, but determining, well, how many staff do you need for, if you're serving this many meals per day, and how many staff do you need if you're serving both lunch and breakfast? There's a different amount for lunch. Is there a different amount for breakfast? So again, engagement with the community food centers to determine okay, this is the number of staff you'll require. Oh, and you're going to need, a lead cook, and you're going to have assistant cooks, and the wages will be different. And this is the number of hours you're going to need if you're serving this many meals. This is the hours you're going to need if you're serving more. How many working days comes into the cost of labor. Also, in Inuit Nunangat, for each of the communities, there's something called a Northern Allowance, which is a stipend for that can range between a couple $1,000s to over $20,000 as to assist with promoting workers in that's such a remote region. And so they provide this stipend, this Northern Living Allowance, in addition to your wages. So we considered that as well. And it differs region by region. The next aspect that we looked at in our modeling was training expenditures. So given if we're going to have this labor component, this number of kitchen staff, well, then we are going to require trainers to train the kitchen staff on health safety, food safety, cooking meals itself. And so, okay, well, how many trainers are we going to need? And then when are these training sessions going to occur? Where are they going to occur? Well, they're going to occur in the regional hubs. We're going to have to fly people out. We're going to have accommodation for them. And add in all those costs to understand what the training expenses is. How frequently will they be trained? There's different training for experienced staff versus new staff and onboarding. Next, we looked at other operations and maintenance costs. Once we had figured these key aspects, the cost of food and the cost of labor and the training expenditures, well, then you have your other operations and maintenance cost. And we used a ratio based on the existing community food centers to understand, well, if you have this many staff, if you have this labor budget and this food budget, this would be your other operations and maintenance costs. Finally, we looked at infrastructure. For infrastructure, again, we required specialized data to understand what the cost of infrastructure was. So we consulted with a architecture firm. There's a different cost for installing a new kitchen or retrofitting a kitchen. And the reason for that is because when you're retrofitting, you have to go around to all the existing utilities, and you have to knock out walls and all that. And then additionally, your infrastructure, what you have to consider is, well, your present day enrollment's this, but you want to build capacity for the next 15 years when you're considering building a new school food kitchen. So you have to consider what's the size going to be in 15 years. And then, okay, based on this number of servings, well, then you can expect this square footage. Based on a different amount of servings, you can expect to have this square footage would be accurate. So again, consulting the experts to find the data. Lastly, for infrastructure, we considered storage. Barges will go in to the north and be delivering all the food. Well, we have to store that, and so what was discussed was retrofitting sea cans that you would use for transportation on barges, so that these could be utilized for storing food. And so we had to consider, okay, what's the cost of retrofitting a sea can for food storage? So all these aspects came into play. The results of this project and what's been published is that the total cost projection between 2023 and 2038 for a breakfast food program in Inuit Nunangat will be $686 million. That's Canadian. That's Canadian, mind you. It'd be more if it was American. For the lunch program, $1.162 billion. And for a breakfast and lunch program, $1.656 billion. Inuit Kanatami will use this information with their partners to advocate and apply for funding support for school food programs in Inuit Nunangat. Here, our colleagues went up to Inuvik, and they had a workshop discussing the school food program. It's just some brainstorming that they've done here, and that's one of my colleagues, Ellen. And our experience in using, our experience in work with ITK isn't just limited to the school food program. We've also looked at the cost of long-term and home community care, as well as the cost analysis for looking at Inuktitut language preservation. I'll refer to the long-term care study first. So again, an organized structures of the model. The foundation of these socioeconomic models is population. What they wanted to understand for this project was, okay, what would be the cost of improving health services so that for long-term care and home community care specifically. So we collected the population data, again, for each of the 4 regions, for all the communities in the 4 regions. And then we looked at the age groups of each of these, of the population within each of these communities. From there, we had to determine, based on these age groups, well, what percentage of people within these age groups require these services, require long-term care and home and community care. And again, so we'd have to go to the internet for that and talk with specialists. So we use government reports to determine government studies, health studies, to look at, okay, the age population within this range, you can expect this many people have a need for home and community care within this age bracket. And within this age bracket, it might be different. So then we found out, okay, this is the demand for the home and community care service. From there, once we know the demand, based on this demand, what's the labor component again? So it's very logical in terms of our structure of modeling. The labor component, based on this is the amount of clinical care each staff member by role would spend on a client of these services. You're going to require this amount of labor based on these ratios. Then also we're going to know the role. We're going to require home support workers, and we're going to require registered nurses. We'll find out the wages for these staff. And based on the amount of hours, the clinical care hours, we can figure out not only the number of staff that are required, but as well, we can figure out what your total labor budget would be. For long-term care, similarly, looking at reports to find the data, we always, the data search is a big aspect of our business, finding data that we can use to determine outcomes. For long-term care beds, what we found was there's this specific demand for long-term care beds based on population age groups. You're going to require this many beds for people of this age bracket. We looked at labor projections by role who are meeting the needs of the long-term care patients, operating costs per bed, and we even looked at capital costs for constructing long-term care facilities. Again, looking at the building construction, but we have to look at the building construction index for these things to understand, okay, well, this is what construction was pre-COVID, this is post-COVID construction costs. They've increased dramatically. From that analysis, we came out with some very interesting results, because there's going to have to be capacity building regarding being able to meet the demand for these services and the jobs that the staff that you'll require to perform those services, as well as the cost to implement these services that don't currently meet demand. Secondly, I'll turn over to the language project. For this project, within Inuit Nunangat, there is a decline in Inuktitut, which is the traditional language. And so the purpose of this project was to look at, well, what will be the cost of preserving Inuktitut language and where it is diminishing to improve its usage. From this, again, we looked at the population numbers for each of the communities, and then specifically Statistics Canada, which is similar to the Bureau of Census, I guess, in the States, has data that it has census profiles for each of the communities. From these census profiles, we could look at, well, how many Inuktitut speakers are there? What's the percentage based on the population of the community? From there, knowing the language status, well, what's the cost of this programming going to be? We looked at academic studies, and we found some academic studies that identified, based on this population, then you would require this type of budget in order to preserve traditional language. So we have these detailed operating and capital costs that we've used from these academic studies, and we're applying in this real world example. From there, we have different costing configurations. We used a per capita rate for this, regional base rates, those 4 regions, they would have different funding amounts. And then priority needs, which communities is Inuktitut really diminished, where it's less than 25% of the population speak Inuktitut. Where would the maintenance program be more sufficient? Greater than 50% of the population speaks Inuktitut. Where would revitalization be required? Between 50 and 25% of the population are using Inuktitut. It's on the decline. Again, we look at all this data. We're able to combine it together to figure out what's the picture or what's the cost for each region in order to preserve language. And these are the socio-economic applications we've used. With regards to our projects, I just want to talk a little bit about best practices. For best practices, so what the key aspects, and I've referred to them going through these, is taking a modular view in terms of how we're going to get to our answer. Population, target population within the population, labor, training, etc. We always take a modular view in our models and seek out data that fits that specific component of the model, fitting all those pieces together for a summary in the end. Secondly, with regards to the formulas that I make a ton of use of, select statements, linking. Select statements have really changed the game for me. It's huge. Correlation matrices and select statements. We get this data, and the items aren't matching up. We need to aggregate the items, and then we use select statements to populate into our categories. The next game changer, there's another one, is the generated categories. Generated categories have been huge for us in terms of our ease of modeling, taking the input data that has all that data in it, all those different data pieces, and creating an automatic category based on what we're pulling from. It's fantastic. It's really a game changer, and that aspect just doesn't exist outside of Quantrix, and it's really great. So I will turn it over to, I guess the last thing is they asked me to talk about some model statistics. The amount of data we're looking at doesn't compare to what I just heard Franz is looking at, not even close. Our issue is always getting the data. That said, however, our models are large with regards to the number of matrices. So I pulled off, this is the, on the right-hand side there, we have the school food program model. On the left-hand side is the long-term care model. The number of matrices is substantial, and working in Excel just really isn't feasible given the number of matrices that we're working with, all these different modular components. The number of calculators is nothing compared to what we've heard here. But what's really great about Quantrix is we're able to navigate these things easily in the application as a consequence of the model browser and the folders which compose our modules. This is an input folder. This is, a specific, this is the labor folder, etc. That has made navigating things very, very easy for us. And it's great because otherwise, I've worked with Excel models before, and it's just so confusing. Well, that would complete my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome, great presentation, and it's really wonderful to see how Quantrix is being used for such an impactful and meaningful project. So that was really great. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Let's see here. We do have a couple of questions. Do you use official demographic statistics? That's from Franz.
Yes, we use the data from Statistics Canada, which is the census data for we use the census data for not only the population, understanding the population for each of the communities, and for various other projects where we're, I've just talked about ITK projects here specifically, but yes, we use the census data. For instance, the census data is not only used for population, understanding the population by age group, understanding the our census also includes what's the language spoken at home, so we could understand, well, how many Inuktitut speakers, what percentage of Inuktitut people speak Inuktitut in each of the communities. We also use the census data for understanding population by household type, which comes into play for waste modeling, because single-family homes produce a different composition of municipal solid waste than multi-residential. So yes, we rely on census data all the time, and we develop our projections based on census data as well.
Great. Could you tell us about your modeling approach for these challenges in Quantrix, easiest and most difficult aspects about designing the models?
The challenge is always, will we find, well, so for all these projects, we do brainstorm the approach with regards to the modules and what generally needs to go in those modules, is like outlined for school food. The challenge for us is always finding data, because we're looking in such niche aspects of things that the data isn't, the population data is readily available from Statistics Canada, but these other aspects are very specialized, and so it requires a serious web search and consultation with experts. But we generally map out an approach with what we require, and then it's a question of whether we can find it. And when we can't find it, we rely on proxy data. For instance, for Inuit Nunangat, sometimes we have to rely on proxy data from Ontario, because Ontario has better data than the remote Arctic. Sometimes we have to use U.S. examples. Example there was Alaska, and well, what's the attendance rate in Alaska with the school food program? Well, it's this percentage. Okay, so yes, we identify, we lay out an approach. This is the data we require, and then we try to fit it in there. But there's a lot of, oftentimes in these consulting models, there has to be some creativity in how to figure out how to apply data. I'm not sure if hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, and actually, I think the next one is very similar and in line with that, is how do you handle different assumptions and the uncertainty in the input data? And I think a little bit is to what you were just saying, but is there anything else you wanted to add to, how do you handle with these different assumptions?
For the assumptions, assumptions are an absolute key for what we're doing. And where we can't find actual data that is from the environment itself that we're looking at, then we go off proxy data. So if I can't find the data for Inuit Nunangat, for Inuit Settlement region, for instance, the data for long-term care for Inuit Settlement region, Nunavik, a lot of it didn't exist. So we found the next best thing, which was data from the Northwest Territories, similar in terms of its geographical proximity to Inuit Nunangat, but not Inuit Nunangat, but a good proxy given its location, given its proximity.
Wonderful.
And
well, thank you.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Sorry.
Not only that, we were able to even dial down to the Beaufort Delta region, which although it comprises some of the Northwest Territories, it also includes a bit of Inuit Nunangat. So we were able to find, again, the best proxy that we could. And yeah, we're often looking for proxy data in instances like this because the data simply isn't available in the actual area itself.
Amazing project, and seriously, thank you for sharing it. Great presentation. Looks like we're at the time, so I will switch things over now for our next presentation. But thank you again, Angus. Really appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.